My cousin lost her mom suddenly. I wanted to help, but I didn't know what to do or what to say.
What if I say the wrong thing and I make her cry? I would just feel awful.
Out of darkness, the light shall shine.
When somebody is able to sit and be with you, even when you are in the midst of such pain. And that's the hardest thing, I think, for all of us. Because again, we don't want to experience pain, so we usually go away from it.
A lot of times where people would see it coming and you felt like you were a leopard or something, they'd turn around and go the other way. At that time it hurt, because, but they didn't know what to do or to say, and they didn't want to be put in an uncomfortable position. I realize that now, but at the time I didn't.
Sometimes people get really scared of the way that people are grieving. And that's another reason they'll want them to get, quote, get over it, or they don't know what to do, so they'll avoid somebody altogether.
When someone close to us dies, or someone close to someone who is close to us dies, it's difficult for us to know what to do. How do we respond? Should we call? Should we make a personal visit? Should we send a card? Should we ignore the whole situation? If we run into them in the grocery store, should we give them a hug? What if they cry? Would I have caused them to cry? And so a lot of times people who really want to, with all their heart, reach out, prevent themselves from doing so out of fear of doing the wrong thing. Unfortunately, many of us as friends have done the wrong thing in the past. But it's okay if we're reaching out with our hearts. The important thing is that we continue to learn how to do the right thing. And so our experts on the panel today, Mary, Lisa, Doran, and Chris, are going to share with us some of the things that they have observed, both personally and professionally, and some of the things that maybe they've heard from people who come to them that they serve, and how they're being treated as people in grief. And Mary Lisa, I'd like to kick off with you because you're still on the grief journey. How was it for you with family and friends?
Well, it has its challenges. I never in my life had been a person who evoked fear from anyone. And now people, I think, approach me with a little bit of fear because they just aren't quite sure. They don't know what to say. Like you said, they don't want to make you cry. But, what I would have to say to people out there is, men's socks can make me cry. So, it's really, it's not about necessarily what you say. It's really all about just the pain that's there. So don't be afraid of the tears, and be as present as you have time to be. And that might be in the form of an email, it might be a form of a phone call, but for me, I did receive emails, I did receive phone calls, but I didn't necessarily have the energy to call them back.
Exactly.
I was empty. I was on the field of Braveheart. That was my metaphor. I was on the field of the Braveheart with my gut split open, bleeding, didn't know if I was going to be alive or dead. And to have the energy to reach out was completely beyond me. And I guess the other thing, I found books to be incredibly helpful for myself. And I would imagine that there are some great resources. Maybe you know some titles that would be helpful for people who are the caregivers of someone who's grieving, you know, a friend or a family member, just to give them some tools to know how to respond.
I really like to, and I really want to support them, but I can't. And yet just being able to go and be with the person and say that in itself can be so healing. It can be what the person wants more than anything. That there isn't any magic words or anything to get over. They just want another human contact to say, I don't know what you're feeling exactly, but just the thought of it is just so overwhelming to me. It's painful for me. You know, you know, what's been going on for you with this? Remember, just being able to really listen and pay attention and acknowledge what life and the experience about the loss is like for that person you're with. Just asking somebody, just open-ended, not, you know, how are you feeling about, and sometimes it can be real specific too. That sometimes people never even ask because they're afraid to ask about specifics because it will bring up emotion about the relationship and the loss. So, and ask the person what their life is like right now, today, at this moment.
I have a wonderful friend, Carlene South, who lives just 2 blocks away, and I found myself wandering over to her house, and you know, she picked me up and she dried my nose and wiped my tears and sat down on the couch with me and got me from that one rock to the next rock so that I could take on the next challenges.
The most helpful things was just having someone to listen, not try to offer solutions or take away my pain.
But I was conscious of the fact that people were letting me do things my own way. And they would just check up on me.
What was the very best thing that anyone did for you, a family or a friend? There were probably many, but what was the thing that just really stands out?
Presence.
Personal presence.
Personal presence. Be there. You know, sometimes I'd have a friend just drop in just to lay eyes on me, and that was such a gift. And that was really it, a personal presence, being invited to things, not feeling like the pariah. You know, it's like all of a sudden I felt like I had the plague or something because I knew that the love out there for me and my kids and my extended family, you know, people would ask about Chris's mother all the time, still do, is tremendous. But in that void of loss, you feel abandoned, or I felt like I don't know how to say it.
I think you've said it perfectly, actually. There's this isolation that can build up.
That's a good word for it, isolation.
And all of a sudden you do have the plague, and someplace in your mind you're thinking probably people do want to reach out. They probably don't know what to say, but
Absolutely.
the feelings are please.
Yeah. And I certainly don't blame anybody.
No.
You know, that was part of my learning how to deal with this too. I don't have any I don't have any negative feelings towards anyone in my community.
Right.
But it is that reality of this change in relationship that people don't know what to do with, and you're trying to figure it out too. So you know,
so we're all at a loss.
We're all at a loss. But
and I really love what you said about that you didn't have the energy to call back, because I think that was one of the experiences for me, is that, you know, people would call and leave a message, and in my heart I thought, oh gosh, you know, they expect me to call back, and I feel really badly about that. And I remember the people who would say on their message, you don't have to call me back, I just wanted you to know I was thinking of you.
Oh, how lovely.
And it just let me off the hook. I didn't have to try to oomph up that energy to make a call that I really didn't feel like making, or then feel guilty if I didn't.
And it's so tremendously healing. It's so supportive, even if it's as simple as that, right?
And it kind of speaks to non-judgment, you know, that they weren't judging me.
Sometimes it's very simple things, bringing a meal every day. And also you can use that as a way to also be present and ask how things are going also as well. Taking children to school for somebody that is having a difficult time arranging all that. Sometimes just doing very practical things, helping somebody figure out their finances, helping somebody move, helping them with childcare. All those can be just as valuable.
A friend of ours came by and he asked if I would like for him to take the girls to a movie. And all I can remember is thinking how odd that is, how odd that my children can go to a movie. But it was probably an okay thing to happen because they needed to be removed from the chaos that was ensuing in the house. And I think the chaos was making them feel unsettled.
And she really helped me during those first days to get all the corporate things in line and let everybody in his work family get the word out to them. And the help of family and friends was so important to me in those days.
The other thing that I think was just really helpful was when people would offer to do something very specific. When people would say to me, well, how can I help? I didn't know. Mm-hmm. I think I felt so needy that I didn't have any answers. Mm-hmm. But when people would say, could I bring you a meal on Tuesday night, or could I bring over lunch and just sit with you, something very specific, then that was really helpful.
Thank you notes were big for me,
Mm-hmm.
Having somebody help me with thank you notes was great.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I think, along the same lines of people being afraid, is that the people who would come in and immediately start talking about Stephen, speak his name, it was like music to my ears.
Absolutely.
And so that I was able to tell stories and really sense his presence again in those memories, rather than the people who came in and talked about everything but
the weather.
I mean, everything but what had happened.
It is amazing how hearing somebody else speak the name is so important. It's so important, because it's like you're not the only one that has this memory. It's like
for me, it was like I know he's not going to be forgotten.
Yeah,
exactly. He really did live.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
When it's somebody that we care about or are close to, we want them to be happy. We want them to get over it. We want them to feel better. And that's natural. It's understandable to feel that way. So many times we'll try to do things to make them feel better, to have them change, to try to give the answers to what they need to do, all kinds of advice. People who are experiencing grief get more advice than ever in their whole life, and sometimes it can be just so maddening. And they don't necessarily need advice. It's just knowing somebody cares about them, and that presence of being able to be present and not have them have to be different than who they are.
The most hurtful comments were things like, God needed her more than you, or she's in a better place.
My aunt took me to dinner for my birthday about 2 weeks after the death. And all she could think about was her problems and her issues. She didn't even ask me once how I was feeling. It was so frustrating.
Nobody else understands what it's like for them. People can, that's one of the things that just, in general, just can drive you nuts, is when you hear people come up to somebody and say, oh, I know what you feel, or I know what's going on for you, and especially in the loss of a child, you have no idea. Even if you've lost a child yourself, you may have some understanding that other people don't have of what they may be going through, but it's still, again, it's such a unique experience for them. And so you don't really know for sure. You really need to ask.
What do you tell them maybe to avoid doing?
I'll tell people to avoid any type of judgment. Everybody, like we've talked about throughout this show, is that they grieve differently. And so if one person may appear on the outside that they're doing just fine, just notice that on the inside they may still be torn apart. They may still have a lot of pain, and to recognize and not judge that. People often return to work and something as sad as their employers say, you know, you can't cry here, it's the workplace, you need to leave your grief at home. And so, you know, I would tell everybody out there, the employers say that grief comes and you don't have a choice, it just hits you sometimes.
That's right.
And while we can try and have that special place, those 30 minutes a day, there could be those triggers, and it will come out, and to just
absolutely,
and to just give that person some space and have patience for that person, because if they can cry and if they can grieve at their own space and in their own time, then they'll begin to heal.
And
you know, I think
space.
In the workplace too, that I've had people say to me, you know, I don't want to talk about this at work because I really need to keep this container. And when people get me talking about it, then all those feelings come up and I don't have control over it. So I think in the workplace, it's really important for people to say when you come back to work, do you want to talk about this or do you not want to? And then honor that. Don't make assumptions about what people want or don't want.
And going back to work is a very hard thing.
Oh my gosh,
I mean, it's one of the most difficult things people do, not just because they're going back to work, but they're just as afraid to face all the people as the people are afraid to face them.
Right, exactly.
So what do you tell people going back to work?
I tell them, let people know what you need.
Good for you.
You know, and that people are afraid to initiate conversation, and so as difficult as it is, it's kind of our responsibility as the person who's grieving to say, look folks, I really need to not talk about this here. I need this to be the place where I can come and not have that be a piece of it. Or I really do need to talk, whatever the case is.
Whatever their need is.
And just to let people know.
Because that makes a smooth road for everyone. I had a man that sent out an email and said, I'm back. I'll be happy to talk about anything at lunch, but during the workday, I need to just stay focused. Thanks for all your attention, and thanks for all your love and support during this very painful time. And then he signed it. But sending that email out, it seems so simple, and yet it gives everybody a, oh, okay.
Well, that's the way we need to do it, yeah, exactly.
They know what they have to do.
I think it's also important to recognize everyone else who's in the workplace who may be feeling the loss or feeling symptoms of the loss. And so if that workplace needs some of their own processing, places like My Healing Place or Hospice Austin can go into the workplace and help them process.
Oh, good point.
Give them tools to be able to talk
to
that person who is grieving.
And there's a lot of silent grief. We may know about this person's grief, but we may not know about this person's grief. And so in that silence, sometimes this person may be heartfelt feeling for this other individual and yet holding their own pain too. So we never know. It's a very delicate balance, this thing called grief. Very delicate balance.
But I would ask that you believe in us and just be there. Just be there. Because it's such an isolating experience. The sadness and the loneliness of grief, we really need you to be our friend.
People in the viewing audience, I think it's important that we all remember that people in grief do want our presence. That if they should start to cry because of something we said, It's not we who created the pain. The pain is living inside of them all day, every day, as Mary Lisa so beautifully spoke to. And so perhaps you're even giving them an opportunity to share that pain with you, a little piece of it, a little piece of it. Don't be afraid to send a card, an email, a telephone call, a knock on the door, as Doran says. Don't be afraid to say, I'll pick up your cleaning. Hey, I'm not afraid to do dishes. Hey, if it's too intrusive for me to come into your home, can I work in your yard? If that bothers you, what is something that I can do? I'd be happy to do anything. If they aren't clear about what they need, then you can walk that tender trail with them just by your personal presence. Just listen to them. Hear the stories. Ask the questions. If you're a member of the family who knew that loved one for years, bring up a story. Remember when Stephen, and then she can add to that story. The important thing is that bodies die, but love doesn't die. And so we who are left living need to remember, want to remember, and desire those around us to remember with us. Thank you so much, ladies. Good evening and welcome to the live portion of tonight's show, the Grief to Peace series. I'm Charmel Teresi and I'll be your host tonight. You just were able to have the opportunity to watch our panel discuss how do we support loved ones in grief. So often our hearts want to open up and do something, support in some way, and we just don't know how to do it. The information you just heard was critically important, just critically important. Tonight we're going to continue that discussion with Sharon Lichtenberger, and she is going to share the story of her beautiful Colonel husband, his life, his diagnosis, his dying on hospice Austin services, and what she most needed both during the illness and after the death. We will be taking your live call-in questions, and we encourage you to call 512-477-2288. Again, that's 512-477-2288. And Sharon and I later on in the show will attempt to answer your questions. But right now I want you to meet a beautiful woman, Sharon, and she has a powerful story. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you for asking me.
And oh, thank you so much for opening your heart and saying yes to us. So could you begin by sharing who your husband was on this earth, as a man, as a husband,
Sure.
as a colonel?
Bob started his life, he was born and raised in South Texas. And due to circumstances, he was raised by his grandparents, who frankly spoke no English. So Bob didn't actually learn the English language until the first day of first grade.
Wow.
And he knew that that there was a difference, and he made it. He mentioned to me that he had his first life-defining moment when he realized that there would be some changes in his life. He graduated from high school. He lettered in all kinds of sports. He graduated from high school as salutatorian and joined the military. He enlisted and spent 2 years. And just before he was scheduled to get out, he did that because then they would pay for him to go to college. And so he took a test at the urging of one of his superiors, and he scored very, very well on the officer candidate test. And they suggested to him that he might consider staying in and becoming an officer. And I guess the rest is sort of history, because he certainly did that. He spent 28 years in the military. That includes the two.
A real career man.
A real career man. A real career man. He rose to the rank of bird colonel.
Wow.
And he served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. He served a tour of duty in Lebanon, and a tour of duty in Panama and in El Salvador. He was a foreign area officer and translated, actually, for every Spanish-speaking country in the world at one time or another. So he had a very illustrious career, if you will. He was a decorated soldier. He had a Purple Heart. He was wounded in Vietnam, and an Air Medal. And I can't remember all the others, but there were others.
But Sharon, my heart is so touched right now by a child from humble beginnings. What a lesson to everyone in the audience that perhaps started first grade and couldn't speak the language. I know I have worked with many people who had that struggle, and like Sharon's husband, really used it as a milestone in saying, I can do this. I can be
He really did, and
who I want to be.
He practiced his English so that he would not have any accent at all, and he didn't. And ultimately, of course, having lived in so many different places, he had no accent. When I met him, it was I tried to determine an accent, and I couldn't. But he was native Texan.
Oh.
And I met Bob after he had retired from the military. It was the second marriage for both of us, and he came, when he retired, he left Washington, D.C. and came back to Texas to make his life here. We actually met online, and it was kind of a whirlwind, I guess, after we finally met. It took 4 or 5 months just emailing back and forth and speaking on the phone. Then we met, and it was just love at first sight, I think you could say. And
you glow just talking about it.
I do.
Really?
I do. It was a magical time in my life. It was a magical time for the two of us together. We both had said never again. We had had long marriages that ended when we didn't want them to. And so to find one another at our ages was remarkable. And he was just an absolute gift in my life. And
now you traveled a lot with him. You spoke to Mary Lepori and I, my partner, and you said that you spent the 7 years with him mainly traveling.
We did. He told me when he asked me to marry him that he was involved with the Purple Heart organization, which is combat wounded veterans. And there are about 35,000 members in the nationwide.
Wow.
And he told me, he said, I have a 2 to 3 year commitment with Purple Heart, and after that I'm yours. And so he rose through the ranks at Purple Heart and became the national commander of all of Purple Heart in this country. And as such, we traveled on behalf of veterans' rights and benefits all across. We laughed and said we ate our way across America, because that's what it seemed like, because everybody we visited wanted to feed us. And
grief and food go together, by the way.
It does. It does. But it was a wonderful, wonderful time. I met so many wonderful people. I met so many wonderful soldiers, current active duty soldiers. I was privy to being in Brooks Army Medical and seeing the soldiers there.
What would you want the audience to know about you know, visiting, I mean, what prepared you to go in and see some of the things you saw? It must have been
I was scared.
pretty devastating.
I was scared. I knew that it was not going to be easy, and yet I didn't want to let that show.
Mm-hmm.
And once you do it, the first 2 minutes are over and the shock is over, and you can then get on with what's important, and that's letting those soldiers know that we appreciate them, that we thank them for their service, and we're so glad they're home.
And it's what we heard in our pre-recorded sessions tonight, personal presence, the most powerful gift that we have to offer another human being is our own personal presence. So how did you find out about his illness?
Bob and I had just come back from a national convention with Purple Heart, and he had to go back to D.C. on Purple Heart business actually fairly quickly. And on the flight home from our trip, he said, you know, my tummy feels a little funny. And I gave him some Tums, I think. And but he called me then a day or two later from Washington, D.C., and he said, my tummy's still not feeling right. Would you get me an appointment with the doctor? And I said, sure. So I did. And he went straight there from the airport to the doctor and called me in his car after he had seen him and said, the doctor says that there's fluid on my abdomen, and that usually is indicative of cancer. And I was just, it was incredulous to me. I said, that's impossible. You haven't been sick a day in your life. He's got to be wrong. It can't be. He said, well, I'm going for a sonogram. And the next day, we were in the oncology office.
Mm.
And
whirlwind.
It had happened so fast. I mean, you hear stories about your life changing in an instant, and it literally does.
That's how we start our program.
It literally, it does.
In one instant, your life can change forever.
Forever. And the oncologist told us that it was stage 4, and we didn't know exactly where the cancer was. We had to do some more testing, so it was another 7 to 10 days before we actually knew where the cancer was located, but we knew that it was stage 4, and we knew that the odds were not good. And we...
So how did your life unfold after that point?
It was totally different. I remember coming home that day and just hugging one another and crying. It was just the two of us, and we just cried and hugged. And then we sat down on the couch, and I told him, I said, whatever comes, I'm here with you. And he, a little humor, I guess, he said, I'm afraid I won't be a good patient. And I might yell at you or something. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I won't take it too seriously if you won't, if I yell back. And so we shook on it. And
sort of like a true military man. I might give you some orders from
might.
headquarters.
He might, although he never did.
Oh.
But he was a good patient. But it was, there wasn't time really to think about the toll. There wasn't time to think about what's happening next week or next month. There was only time to, we see this doctor tomorrow and we see this doctor the next day, and we have these tests in an hour, and that's sort of what our life became.
Scheduling.
Scheduling.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And so there wasn't a lot of time to think about it at that point. It was just do what you need to do.
And as a caregiver, we often become totally exhausted, but we have so much adrenaline going, trying to make sure that our loved one is well taken care of, that we don't realize that until after the death has actually occurred. But How did you happen to hook up with Hospice Austin?
Oh, it was amazing. The doctor had suggested it. Bob had had chemo and it had not been successful, and he just couldn't handle anymore. And the oncology, Texas Oncology, suggested Hospice Austin. And at first, Bob was very much against it. It was just a place to go to die. He just didn't want it. And I told him, I said, but I may need it. I wish you would listen to them for me. And that's all I had to say. And he, of course, would do it. So the nurse came out, and she was just marvelous. What I've learned is they all have some grief of their own that they've been through. They're not newbies at this. And she won him over fairly quickly. And at that point, Bob was had almost wasted away. He, of course, had lost all of his beautiful gray hair, and his weight was just nothing. And he was pale. And I took her, I said, I'd like for you to come with me. And I took her into his study. And I said, that little man sitting in the chair in there is not Colonel Lichtenberger, the man that you see in this room, because there were all sorts of pictures of him and his awards, his Purple Heart, things that he had been awarded.
His life.
His life was in that room, absolutely his life. And I said, I want you to remember that this is the man, not that little man that's wasting away in there. Inside of that little man is still Colonel Lichtenberger.
A huge spirit.
And huge spirit, and a huge fighter. Oh, he fought so hard, so bravely. And it made all the difference in the world, I think, to her. She knew then how best to relate to him. And she related to him as the Colonel. And
she called him Colonel?
She called him Colonel. And he was at ease then. He was at ease. It wasn't until a couple of weeks, I guess, later that he had gotten worse. He had fallen out of bed, and I'd had a very difficult night. And
now this is a very important point. We talked about it a little bit. Audience, I really want you to pay attention to this story, because it's something that happens to many caregivers. And Sharon will share with you what she had to do.
So I called hospice. I didn't know what to do when Bob fell out of the bed. I couldn't lift him. I couldn't.
Because even though they're wasting away, it's still dead weight you're trying to
Yes,
lift.
and I couldn't get him back in the bed. And they told me to call the fire department.
Right.
And that they would that the hospice nurse would be there the next day, which was a Saturday. I called the fire department, and they came, and they were just wonderful. They, in no time, had him back in bed, and all was well. And I introduced him to them as Colonel Lichtenberger, and they all shook his hand, and it was nice. They were just wonderful. I couldn't have asked for
Makes me want to tear up, because service people, firefighters,
exactly. They're all
serving service people.
That's right. And they respect one another. And so we made it through the night. The next day, when the hospice nurse came, it was the lady who was on call. She was not the regular nurse, but she was on call. And she came, and she got Bob taken care of, and got his medications and everything, and then she sat down by me on the couch, and she put her hand on my knee and patted it, and she said, now what can I do for you? And I fell apart. For the first time, I just absolutely fell apart. And I know now, I didn't at the time, but I know now that she gave me permission. She was there. She was saying, I know you need something.
Validating
she
what you
did.
had been going through.
And she told me, she said, you can no longer do this all day and all night. We have to bring somebody in to stay with him at night. And we can either hire a nurse, or if you have friends or relatives or whatever that you can call on, that would be good. But you cannot do it all day and all night.
Would you look in your camera and tell the audience that you cannot do it?
You cannot do it all by yourself. You think you can. My thought process during Bob's illness was, I will take care of me later.
Okay. Thank you. Very important point. And now we're going to have the opportunity to see some pictures of Sharon and her wonderful husband, Bob.
Through our love, there is no surer light to guide me from above that I know of. Then we will go dancing on forever on that starlit holiday. So remember, I am until always on my way. Shine on me warmly with your light. Feather my pillow through this night. Sing me lullabies from heaven till I'm with you on our day. So let's remember, I am until always on my
Sharon, beautiful pictures of a wonderful man. And audience, I'd like you to know that the music that you heard in the background was written and sung by Dr. Patricia Stewart, who has done much grief work, especially with an organization here in Austin called the Christie Center, once called For the Love of Christie. And you'll notice that some of the words were referring to dancing. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to share a story about dancing, but I understand we have a phone call. Welcome, caller, to the Grief to Peace show.
Hi.
Hi.
My grandmother had passed away.
Yes.
And my grandfather has been struggling with it, kind of isolating himself and not getting out and doing some of the activities that he used to be involved with, that he really, kind of kept him alive. And I'm worried that he's kind of giving up on some things.
Thank you for that question and that comment. Oftentimes when someone that we've lived with for many, many years dies, the partner just can't get back into the swing of things for a while. Right away, our mind seems to know that the death has occurred, but it takes our bodies a long time to absorb the totality of the reality of the loss. And it's hard for us to go back to our regular schedule. Sharon, I know you have a story about right after the death, and this might help this young caller with her situation, that you went to visit your son and...
Yes, yes. The day after the funeral, I flew with my son and daughter-in-law back to their home in Arizona, and we got there and I went to bed. And I got up to have maybe just a little bite to eat and visit the restroom and go back to bed. And I remember I could hear them talk a little bit, and I remembered my daughter-in-law saying, "Do you think we should see about her or call a doctor?" And so I thought to myself, the next time I'm up, I need to tell them that I really am okay. I'm just exhausted. And I didn't even know how exhausted I was.
Exactly.
And I didn't realize at the time, though I do know now, it was a way to not have to deal with it. I wasn't ready. My body was not ready to deal with the loss. Intellectually, you can accept it. Your heart follows sometime later.
And that's a very powerful statement. Your heart follows sometimes later. And what I would want you to do with your grandfather, perhaps, is to just be there for that person. Be there for that person that you love so very much. And know that your personal presence is the greatest gift you bring. You don't have to run around fixing things. Nothing we can do. I remember when I first went into this work, a mentor said to me, Charmel, you need to know that this is the most helpless profession in the world because we can't stop anyone from dying and we can't bring anyone back. But what we can do is bring our loving heart presence to that person. It's the greatest gift we have to offer. Thank you for calling in that question. And I understand we have another question. Caller, welcome to the Grief to Peace program.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a question about, I had a coworker of mine who is a friend that I work with fairly regularly who lost a child recently, and they'll be returning back to work probably right after the holidays, and I'm not really good with things like this, and I'm wondering what I can say to this person, or if you have any advice on how I can open up the conversation there.
Sure. I'm really glad that you called in. Going back to work is very hard, as we mentioned in the pre-recorded session tonight, for people, but it's hard for the co-workers when someone is coming back, because one woman told me once, I just stumble over my tongue. I want to say the right things, and I seem to say all the wrong things. Sharon, what would you suggest?
I think let this person know that you're there, and when they're ready to talk, you're there. If they don't want to talk, you're still there. And give them some time, and they'll tell you, they'll let you know by their actions probably how best to help. The main thing is the presence, just be there.
And don't be afraid of them. They're just hurting. And they may look different, they may look more tired, they may look a little slumped over. It takes a while for us to get our energy back in the flow. So just when you see them, say, hi, I'm so glad you're back. I'm glad to see your face, and I want you to know that we have held you in our hearts. That's all you have to say. Or if you feel uncomfortable saying something like that, just say, know that you've been in my thoughts. And if there's anything I can do, just let me know. A lot of people feel more comfortable emailing. Hi, glad you're back. It's good to have you in your chair again. We have been thinking about you, and if there's anything we can do, just let us know in an email. And then the grieving person often feels more comfortable emailing back what would feel right to them. That was a very good question. So, Sharon, going back to the song we heard during the pictures, and Patricia was singing about dancing, and you told me a beautiful story. Would you share that with our audience?
Absolutely. Bob and I, from our courtship on, we danced in the kitchen. That was just part of our life. And it wasn't uncommon. We could be strolling the shops in Wimberley, and if the right tune was on, he'd take my hand and we'd dance a few steps. And it's such a wonderful memory for me now, because when I think about it, I can see his eyes looking into mine, and I can feel his hand on the small of my back, and it's an amazing memory. It was the same kitchen where we hugged and hugged and cried when we found out the diagnosis was stage 4 gastric cancer. But it's a wonderful memory.
And so what exactly happened? A song came on and he invited you to dance. You said he was very weak at the time.
Oh, that was when he, yes, I'm sorry. I had gotten him down for the night, and I used that time usually to try to answer some emails or just relax a little bit if I could. And I was in the other end of the house, and he always went to bed with music. He enjoyed listening to the music as he went down for the evening. And I heard this loud calling for me, and I thought, oh my gosh, what's wrong? And I went running in there, and I said, what's wrong? And he said, I want to dance. And I said, you want to dance? And he couldn't walk across the room. And he said, yes, help me up. And I helped him up, and I held on to him, and he held on to me, and we swayed to the music. And I know in his mind he was dancing. And there's some very poignant moments through life's difficulties.
Yes.
And some of the most intimate moments of my life during the time that he was so ill.
Yes. As our opening song says, through the darkness shines the light.
Yes.
And some of those powerful memories help us move forward as we walk the grief journey. As you reflect back on his illness and his dying, were you with him when he died, actually?
Absolutely. He died at home. That's where he wanted to be. And I was there, of course. He was and had been for the last couple of days medicated so that he was not too aware of anything that was going on. And I was with him. They told me it was time, the hospice nurse, and I gathered him up in my arms and whispered in his ear, and I felt his last breath leave him. And when I looked down, I knew he had gone because it was an empty vessel. It wasn't Bob anymore.
Right.
It was just an empty vessel. And it was amazing to me. I sat beside the bed for a long, long time because I couldn't believe. It was just, it truly was like an empty vessel. That's all. That's the only words I have for it.
And that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much, Sharon, for being here with us tonight. I feel like I know him at such an intimate level, and what a powerful man he was on our earth.
Yes.
And audience, some of the things you heard tonight about how to be there with people, I think the greatest gift is yourself. Bring your personal presence. I want to thank my partner, Mary Lepori, for her passion for creating this show. I want to thank Channel Austin for being there with us every step of the way as we've produced these mini-series. And I want to invite you to join us when we'll have Dr. Sharon Wesch, who will share with us the poignant grief of losing a child, either prenatal, miscarriage, born at birth, dead at birth, or living in the intensive care unit for several days and then dying. And she has powerful stories of parents that she has served and lessons that we can learn from her. And thank you, Sharon Littenberger, for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure meeting you and talking with you about your husband. Good evening.
The pain of loss is the great reminder of all the love that we shared. Embracing life makes the sadness kinder. Take me with you everywhere. Make a new life here with me in your soul. Take to heart what you have and hold. I'm your angel now, always by your side, to feel my presence. Close your eyes and make a new life here.
I have learned that just being sincere and listening to someone, to their stories, their memory of their loved one, sharing that memory with them, and sometimes just a hug without any words is the most helpful thing that I can do for them.
I now understand that crying is a good tool for those in grief. Instead of rushing to stop someone, I just sit back and let the tears flow.
Do not let your heart be troubled. Our love is still alive. Nothing on this earth can take what is always you and I. Make a new life here with me in your soul. Take to heart what you have and hold. I'm your angel now, always by your side, to feel